Here we are at Unit 17 with counter bores, counter sinks, and spot faces. I've already shown you how to actually create a counter bore and how to create a counter sink. Of course, here's a picture of a counter bore going into a tap piece. You've got a clearance hole so the boat will pass through it. It recesses the head below the surface of the part. An example is right here. We've got a part that's been counter bored. It recesses the head below the part. It allows it to be bolted to something down here, and it has clearance around the screw, and you'll remember that there's a 30-second total clearance around the screw. So we drill our hole a 30-second larger than the diameter of the screw. That's a counter bore. Here's the way we create a counter bore. The pilot on the counter bore is just right at the same size as the clearance hole. It slips down in the hole and then creates the counterboard hole. That's a counter bore. We looked at counter sinks. Okay, this is the hole that we countersunk with this counter sink. It allowed us to pass the screw down through the part, and then we can bolt it to something. Now, there's a difference between a counter sink and a counter bore. A counter bore will allow a part to be tightened down, and it's got a little bit of movement there. You can move it back and forth wherever the clearance is to adjust it maybe a little bit. When we got a counter sink and we tighten something up, that counter sink is going to pull that part into the location because it's going to pick up on that taper all the way around the head of the screw. For instance, if I've got a 3/8/16 hole here, I take and put it through here and tighten it up. Right now, I've got clearance around the screw, but when this tightens up on here, it's going to pull that part into position and not allow it to move around because it's picked up on that taper. So it allows it to locate the part. It locates the part. Another good example of a counter sink locating a part, right here, I've got a boring bar. Right here is an insert that goes in the boring bar. It's got a countersink in it. It allows us to lay that on there, take the screw, put it in there, and this screw actually picks up on that countersink in the insert, and it allows that insert to be pulled into place. That's an example of a countersink. Another place you would see countersinks is on latch plates on doors or hinges on a door. They have flat-headed cap screws in there that actually you want those hinges to be pulled into place. So that'd be another place. Now, they show you a countersink here, and the last thing they show you is a spot face. A spot face is kind of like a counter bore, but it doesn't go deep enough to recess the head. This part here is a cast part. It doesn't have a flat surface right up on the top, and it allows us to come in with an end mill or a counter bore and just spot face it, just go so deep to get a good flat surface for the head of the boat to come in contact with. An example is right here. Right here, I've got a part. This is a cast part. These surfaces here have not been machined. It's actually been poured into a casting. Molten metal goes in there. It forms the part. We come back and machine certain surfaces. This surface here has been machined. It allows us to take a cap screw, pass through there. The head's not recessed, but the head comes in contact with that square surface that we put on there. That's what a spot face does. It could be a socket head cap screw, or it could just be a hex-headed screw that comes in contact with that piece. So that's an example of a spot face. Now, the only other thing I want to cover is right here in the book, how they actually dimension. You'll look on this one here. This is the old method. It's a diameter 0.25. That's the through hole. A 0.5 counter bore. That's the diameter of the counter bore. By 0.25 deep, that's the depth of the counter bore. Okay. The way they do it now is they use symbols on a lot of stuff. You use a diameter, then a counter bore symbol, and then a depth symbol for the depth. Okay. On a counter sink, that counter sink is a diameter 0.25 by 0.5 by 82 degree countersink. That's the old method. Now they're just using all symbols and pictures. All right. Same thing on a spot face over here on the other page. It does the same way. They just using symbols instead of that. Now for next time, we're going to do this part right here. Just work on that and get that done for the for your work. Now, if you think back to where we had symbols, lines and symbols. If you get to this page right here, page 16, there's a mistake in your book. And I pointed this out when we went over it, but I wanted to point it out again. This is a counterbore symbol. The countersink symbol is a V. V for countersink, okay? The little counterbore looking shape for counterbore, V for countersink. It's not the same shape for both a countersink or counterbore. They got a mistake in your book. So just remember that.